Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. Today we have with us both Aya Soma to my right and Bante J to my left. And the three of us will be discussing some common questions about karma. So recently, someone sent us a list of questions about karma. And as these questions come up relatively often, Aya Soma suggested this would be a great topic for discussion this evening. So we'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start discussing these questions together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So we have these questions about karma, which were sent in by one of our regular participants by the name of Kausar Friend. And we'll start talking about these. And also, if you have other questions which are related to the topic of karma, or you wish for further clarification on any of these questions, then feel free to type them in and we'll see what comes up. So the first one, this one is, what, if any, is the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth for non-Buddhists and lay people? So this is a very interesting question. So which venerable would like to start?
Well, actually, Bante, I would like to give some context also on how Matthias, who is this?
Kausar Friend.
Yeah, Kausar Friend. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your actual name properly. But anyway, Matthias was essentially asking this question in the broader context of the misuse of the doctrine of karma, so that we see that a lot of times actually karma is used as a way to actually insubordinate people. So, for example, within the context of India, for example, there is a sort of institutionalized way of using karma as a way to put certain people on the lower kind of order of things, and some other people on the higher point of things, and kind of justifying the status quo of the caste system rather than doing anything about it. So our friend was essentially, I guess, questioning the purpose of the usefulness of the doctrine of karma when we see that it's actually often misused. It's misunderstood maybe, and it's also misused by many people. So that was more what he was asking in terms of so what is the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth?
Yeah, and just looking at this question, to me there actually appears to be two distinctly different questions here. One is, what is the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth for non-Buddhists? And the other question is, what is the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth for lay people? So for lay Buddhists. So to me, these are two very, very different issues. First off, when dealing with people who are not Buddhist, I actually think that for the most part, it's not really good to put much emphasis, at least in the beginning. It's not really worthwhile putting that much emphasis on the topics of karma and rebirth. But rather, it's important to emphasize the foundational practices of Buddhism, such as generosity, kindness, compassion, precepts, mindfulness, equanimity. So practices which are things which can be applied to one's life and which produce results which are easy to see. So karma and rebirth are doctrinal topics which are in my opinion, primarily of value for people who are genuinely interested in taking on the Buddhist path, because it answers a number of otherwise unanswerable questions. So if a non-Buddhist person directly asks me, does Buddhism teach rebirth? Then of course I'm going to say yes. If they ask me to talk about karma, then I'm going to talk about karma. But if they don't directly ask about these things, I'm not usually inclined to bring it up of my own volition, because in my opinion, I don't think it's particularly helpful in the early stages of somebody starting to learn a bit about Buddhist practice. But it is something which becomes very relevant, actually relatively quickly. So it is a topic which I think is important to talk about, but it's not something which I would emphasize when speaking about Buddhism to non-Buddhist people, at least not in the beginning. Anyone else have thoughts on this topic, karma and rebirth, when talking to non-Buddhists?
Yes, well, actually, I would say so. The purpose of it, getting back to the way that our friend had, put it, phrase the question. Placed in the context of the misuse of karma. Well, I would say that even though karma is misused by certain people or certain cultures, and there's a misunderstanding of the concept of karma, that doesn't invalidate the understanding of karma itself. Actually, if anything, one, instead of putting effort in hiding the truth, one should actually put effort in clarifying, elucidating the truth. And that's what we're talking about. It's not a doctrine, karma, but it's a truth of karma. We can use other, essentially, words, perhaps. The truth of action, the truth of intentional action, and the truth of causality. So the truth of cause and effect. So without understanding that there is a cause, multiple causes and conditions that generate an effect, well, it's very difficult to empower anyone to do any type of Buddhist practice, and also to understand reality. So yes, of course, it's actually very difficult truth to grasp, to understand. If we've actually fully understood karma, then we would be fully enlightened, or at least like have a level of awakening. So until we, someone attains a level of awakening, there will still be a kind of more kind of intellectual, perhaps, understanding of karma. But sometimes actually also experiential. Wait, I'll take that back. Actually, I would say that some cultures maybe have misunderstood it, but actually some other cultures, actually there's much research also in Western science environments of Tibetan people, lay people, who actually experience significant less suffering than the average person, even though they were going through really hard time as refugees. They have gone through a lot of turmoil and so forth. And so because of the enrooted understanding of karma, understanding of rebirth, there was actually already like the sort of like the impersonality of the things that happen to us. We kind of can understand them fully. Of course, then that can be also mixed with some wrong view, which I'm not saying that the Tibetan people have that, but some people can have also the misunderstanding that whatever we've done in the past, and we're, receiving the fruits of that karma today. So that vipaka, and then that vipaka, we just need to endure it, and that's it. But actually, if we just don't make any other, if we think that we're just enduring it and we're not doing any actions to actually change the status quo, in reality, we're still making karma, which is the karma of non-action, or the karma of keeping on repeating, or creating the conditions in order to reap the same consequences in the future. So it's a little bit more complex and more kind of refined than what we usually think karma and rebirth are, so to speak. So once again, I would say the important thing is to clarify and elucidate the concept rather than hide the truth.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly important since the word karma is so often used in ways which are not in accordance with what the Buddha spoke about. So karma does not equate with fatalism or determinism. So people often say things like, oh, it was my karma to have such and such happen to me. And they mean that in the way of like, it was this inevitable predetermined fate which cannot be avoided. But that's not how the Buddha was talking about karma. So the Buddha was talking about karma as us performing deliberate actions, which then produce corresponding results. So this is not fatalism or determinism. In fact, it's talking about how we have the power to change the course of our lives, how we have the power to redirect the stream of experiences towards either beneficial or harmful directions, depending upon what choices we make. And we can even make choices which lead all the way to full awakening, if that's what we decide to do. So karma should not be mistaken for fatalism, because it's actually quite the opposite. It's a very powerful statement that we have the ability to redirect the course of our experience, even to complete transcendence. So the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth for lay people. By this, I assume you mean Buddhist lay people. Actually, once somebody is Buddhist, it's actually very important for them to have a good understanding of karma and rebirth. So whether they're a lay person or a monastic, because karma and rebirth are in fact critically central components of the Buddhist teachings. So what is the purpose of Buddhism? It's to achieve freedom from suffering. Well, if there was no rebirth, then freedom from suffering would be pretty easy. It would just happen with the death of the body, assuming that one identifies consciousness with the body. Then, well, that's it. There's nothing you need to worry about. If there was no rebirth, then dukkha would just end automatically on its own at some point, whether in 5 minutes or 50 years. So rebirth is definitely a critical thing to understand. And similarly, karma is actually the foundation of all Buddhism, because karma, as I mentioned before, is the capacity to make deliberate choices, which then create corresponding results. So, for example, some of the spiritual teachers at the time of the Buddha had the view that choice was an illusion. Actually, many philosophers these days also make the same claim, that choice is an illusion. So some of them said that choice was an illusion, and that we are just observing a sequence of experiences arising of their own accord. And there's nothing we can do to change any of that. You just sit back and watch the show, and hopefully at some point it'll be a nice show. And so the Buddha was actually very clear in rejecting that and saying, no, actually we have the power to make choices. And we can make choices that produce good results if that's what we decide to do. So Buddhism is all about making good karma. That's actually what Buddhist practice is. Buddhist practice is the practice of making good karma. And making the karma which leads to awakening. So definitely it's a critical concept for Buddhist lay people to understand in detail, at least to a sufficient detail that one understands how to practice the path of awakening.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And I want to just take the time to say hello to all our friends, Vivian, Karen, Anna. Good to see you, Anna. Friend from Italy, Mahaguru, Heng. Anna says, can't wait to see you in November. How's our friend? Great, who is asking all these questions. So if you have any follow-ups, please type them in. Janaki, Sud, Rahulawan, Charles, Charles Lee, Joe, Gita, Morgana, Dolly, Ronald, Nikon. Welcome, friends. Rahulawat, I think your question is a little bit off topic, so maybe you can bring that tomorrow for monk chat, right?
Yeah, that's a great question for monk chat.
Yeah. Mary, good to see you, Kumu. And Randy.
Okay.
All right.
And do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I'm good for the next one.
Okay,
Great.
You're waiting for the next one?
Excellent.
You guys spoke enough about this, so that's good.
Perfect. Well, the next one is, what is the purpose of the doctrine of karma and rebirth for serious practitioners and monastics?
You spoke on that as well.
Yes, and you can speak on it a bit too. So what are your thoughts on this question?
It's the same as the last one, really, in a way. I mean, I don't think it should be different between a serious practitioner and a regular practitioner in terms of karma. I think we should try to do our best to, read the suttas and understand what the Buddha said about karma, and then also to see that system working in our own life, how things that arise and we realize how we fed them and we created them, right, in the past, and how our habits are the results of our past actions, and all of these kind of things. You study and understand clearly what the Buddha said in the suttas, and then you observe that in your own experience, and then you will understand karma. You will understand that there's an interesting clinical psychologist who said that of dealing with of having clients and for people for like 30 years, he never saw anybody get away with anything ever. He said that he would see that they would be coming in with a problem and they would trace it back like action by action to like initial causes. And I was like, that's so Buddhist. Like that's so amazing. And like I've also when I worked child protective services, I never saw anybody get away with anything. And I don't think I've ever gotten away with anything. And we don't want to say that in a negative way, but it's just like it's an understanding that like Bhante said, your actions have consequences. The Buddha really did not like the Ajivikas, who believe that you could go up and down the Ganges slaying beings until there's huge piles of bodies and then nothing would come of it, right? The Buddha did not have anything good to say about people who didn't think that your actions had mattered, right? That your actions were important, right? One of the 5 remembrances, the 5 subjects of contemplation the Buddha always wants us to remember is that our actions matter. We are responsible for our actions. So this is something that a Buddhist practitioner should understand, right? That they are responsible for their actions. And when you see that, you actually also start to see how much you cause yourself suffering, how much your actions, right? And also your actions in the past, not just your actions now. You're just like, oh, wow, I've kept doing this specific action, right? I've kept repressing something, or I've kept pushing something away, avoiding it, or I've kept feeding this bad habit, and it keeps coming back. And if I keep feeding it, my actions determine how that unskillfulness will continue on into the future. You can see much of the doctrine of karma in your own experience, in your own actions in this life. Especially as you live long enough too, you can also see how your past actions have played a huge role in where you are and how you are in this present. And then once you realize that, you're like, wow, okay, I better start acting really skillfully and developing skillful mind states and acting in skillful ways and practicing well.
Yeah, one of the clear statements of this in the suttas is in the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta, where the Buddha says, whatever one habitually thinks about and ponders on will become the inclination of one's mind. So this actually is a statement of karma. If you constantly dwell in greedy thoughts or aversive thoughts, then your mind will become increasingly greedy or increasingly aversive. And then eventually it gets to a point where it seems out of control. It seems like your mind is just producing grumpy thoughts all the time. And like, well, where are these thoughts coming from? Well, it's because you've trained your mind to do that. You've built up the karma of grumpiness, and now you're reaping the results of all of that karma. So this is actually a very clear demonstration of karma in action. And also a clear demonstration of how we can take control of the process of karma to get good results. So if you want to change the course of your mind, well, then start deliberately directing your mind in the way you want it to be. Deliberately think thoughts of loving kindness, and your mind will become more kind and gentle. That's karma right there. That's how karma functions. So sometimes you meet someone who they're just like a little saint from the time they're born, and you're like, well, that's not fair. And it's like, well, of course it's not fair, unless you're thinking in terms of multiple lives, and you realize, oh, that's because this person trained their mind in that way in previous lives. So they're just carrying over the training, the development from previous lives.
Thank you. And Charles Lee actually has a question. Can a group of beings create and experience the ripening of karma across generations? For example, is the current experience in America a ripening of karma created by the actions of those who founded America?
Not in the Buddhist understanding, no. So the concept of generational karma is not a Buddhist concept, as far as I can understand. So rather the functioning of karma in terms of selecting where your rebirth is or what conditions you're reborn in, that can have an effect. That's one of the determining factors for where and under what conditions we're reborn. But specifically like, oh, somebody 200, 300, 400 years ago in this country did something bad. Well, it wasn't me that did that, probably. Maybe it was. But it probably wasn't me that did that. So no, that's not my karma. The person who did that action, that's their karma, and they get the painful results. But it's not my karma, so I'm not going to get any result from that.
Can I speak to this?
Mm-hmm.
To piggyback on what Aya said in earlier, I find the concept of a group karma to be very, very pernicious. As Bhante said, this is not how you never see this concept if you read the suttas of group karma. But group karma is exactly like the caste system. Oh, you were born such and such this, well then this is your karma, right? Or you were born with this skin color, or you were born to this religion or to this or that. It can be a very pernicious thing. It's one of those things where you do have to be very wary of attributing something to a whole group of people. This is like I said. Well, it's look at the caste system in India. You're born as an untouchable. Well, that's you're part of that group. That group, whatever. These people, maybe they'll eventually be reborn as something higher than an untouchable. But for it's a very pernicious thought, and it is not in the Buddhist teachings, at least in the early texts, as I understand. So,
yes, and actually, it's my understanding. Thank you, Bhante, for both actually venerables for highlighting that. But in the early texts, actually, the Buddha, I can't remember now on the top of my head the exact sutta where the Buddha reprimands actually a lady from I think it's the mango dealer lady.
Oh yeah, the mango dealer. Yeah,
makes an assumption on one of her relatives, like karma, essentially, and the karma that they have made, and the destination where they're going to. And the Buddha is very firm, and first of all, tells her that she's a fool, essentially, in making those types of assumptions. But then makes the declaration that only one like him, as in one fully awakened being that is a Sammasambuddha, can actually fully understand exactly all of what exactly a sentient being has done in the past that has created those type of actions that will lead to a particular destination. But in other parts of the suttas, actually, the Buddha says that if we start, wrapping our minds in trying to investigate all of these workings of karma, our mind will explode. So essentially what we need to really fully understand, what is really useful with the teachings of karma and rebirth, is to understand that our actions have consequences, and that suffering is actually optional. We can create we are empowered to, we're not only, we're empowered essentially to make good actions. And by good actions, we mean actions that lead towards the cessation of suffering, towards Nibbana. So we can actually do it. And of course, we are not fully enlightened because in the past, we haven't really quite grasped that our actions had such severe consequences, right? In one way or the other. We take for granted perhaps our good actions. We don't put too much weight on them. A lot of times we actually kind of overlook even the goodness that we have accumulated, the goodness that is already like essentially the result of past actions. So we don't put the time to actually keep it there or grow it or, like do anything about it. We're like, oh yeah, sure, of course, everybody should be kind or generous or whatever if we're kind and generous. And then that starts fading away because we're not nurturing it. And also when it comes to our bad actions, perhaps killing mosquitoes and so forth, we just might think that they're trivial things, but actually those actions have a strong karmic weight. And we can see it right here, right now, when we start noticing the effect of suffering in the mind, the effect of irritation in our mind, the effect of like creating that habit of killing sentient beings. So all of that is extremely important when we see it in the context of karma to, once again, empower us to see that we don't have to be the victims of anything that we've done in the past, but we actually can make change right here, right now. And we can become fully enlightened right here, right now.
Yeah. And there's also a question here by Kumo. So relatively quick answer to this one. Kumo says, is it an Abhidhamma that karma is classified to 7 to 8 different karmas? For example, ahosi karma, canceling karma, dittadhamma vedaniya karma, actions to give result in this birth itself, etc. It's definitely not in the early texts. So there are kind of like hints at this in the early texts, but nothing is fleshed out to that level of detail. So the early texts mainly emphasize 3 kinds of karma. So wholesome karma, which leads to pleasant results, unwholesome karma, which leads to unpleasant results, and karma, which leads to awakening. So broadly speaking, this is the main categorization that we see in the suttas. And there's a few places in the suttas where the Buddha talks about karma in a more complex way. But this kind of like systematic categorization of different kinds of karma, yeah, that's definitely apocryphal.
I love karmas, not mamas. I'm laughing because my mother is actually currently here at Empty Cloud Monastery.
Yeah.
So when you said 7, 8 different mamas, I was like, yeah, it kind of feels like my life right now.
Should I take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of continuing off the previous topics. What is the right way to talk about karma and rebirth with non-Buddhists? How can I mitigate harmful distortions? Well, we already spoke about this a fair bit, but one thing I would just add, since the caste system was brought up. Sometimes, again, karma is used to justify mistreating people. Like when somebody is, again, the example of the caste system, someone who's born into a low caste, it's like, well, it was their karma, so there's no point in helping them. Or people say like, oh, that person, they're born in poverty, well, there's no point in giving them any support because it's their karma to be poor. Or someone's being oppressed, and it's like, well, there's no point in helping them, it's their karma to be oppressed. But this is a complete misunderstanding of karma. And in fact, one is then generating bad karma by saying such things, believing such things, and acting based upon such wrong beliefs. Then one is generating tremendous bad karma for oneself. Rather, the proper thing is when you see someone who's having a hard time, then you produce a mind of compassion and you try to find a way to help. That's good karma. And that's the karma which then means that you will experience supportive conditions in the future. So on the other hand, if you see others suffering and you do nothing, if you cultivate apathy and disregard for others in need, well, that's clearly bad karma. That's producing bad karma, which then will result in unsupportive conditions for you, possibly even counter supportive conditions for you. So this is one harmful distortion that really needs to be targeted directly. You have a thought?
Yeah. Because I, at least in many years, have frequented lots of like Buddhist online things, there's always a common misconception by people getting into Buddhism that karma is some kind of like cosmic justice, right? It's like some kind of like almost like a not like a, what do they call it? Like not a god. It's like there's some kind of force that's like meting out justice. You did a bad thing, so you're going directly to hell. And really, this is something that should be kind of spoken to. This is something I talk about fairly decently when I talk to people who are just getting into Buddhism. That the karma is action and result. It's not that there's some kind of karma police or whatever. That's it's like, oh, they did a bad action. It's not like that. This is something that because most religions do have some kind of system like that. It's very common for people to have that kind of, at least that, not the view, but like it's in their perception that, oh, I've heard of this kind of thing before. So karma is just like this, and it's not. It's quite an, especially the Buddhist aspect of karma is quite a very unique way of understanding how things work.
Yeah, and also I would add that we can look at, as an inspiration, at the Buddha's behavior. So if the Buddha actually adopted this wrong approach of karma, then he wouldn't have taught anyone. He would have just said, oh yeah, it's your bad karma that you're suffering. Bad karma to you, bad karma to you. I'm the only one with good karma. I'm the only one enlightened. So it's not that he speaks like that, like, for example, whether someone, had their whole family that died, for example, like Kisa Gotami, she was saying, essentially her entire family like burnt on a funeral pyre. It's not that the Buddha was like, oh yeah, Kisa Gotami, that's all your bad karma. Who cares? He actually doesn't even speak that way, even to Angulimala, until actually Angulimala is fully awakened and is reaping some fruits of his past karma. That's very important when basically people are harassing Angulimala, who is an enlightened being. And the Buddha actually then, that's the only time that I can see actually in the suttas where he tells someone, well, you are now currently reaping the results of your karma, of your past karma, which is basically killing so many sentient beings. Angulimala, for those who don't know, is this kind of villain who, not kind of, actually big villain in the Pali Canon that had killed so many different beings and different humans and was collecting all their fingers, right? And then the Buddha actually puts him on the right path, and he becomes a fully awakened being, but then still reaps the results of his past karma. And actually the Buddha there tells him, well, you're fully enlightened being. If you hadn't become a fully enlightened being, then you would have reaped really horrible consequences, so many eons in hell realms because of the actions that you've made. But when he's encountering different sentient beings, even though he's the one who exactly knows why people are, enduring the situations that they're enduring, all the nuts and bolts, he still doesn't find it useful to highlight that. What he finds useful to highlight is the path. This is suffering, the Four Noble Truths, right? This is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. This is the end of suffering. This is the way out of suffering. He doesn't lecture people on, this is your bad karma, just shut up. And he doesn't make blank statements. He never says, for example, oh, you're a woman, it's your best bad karma, or you're from that town, it's your past bad karma, or you are that color of the skin, it's your past bad karma. No, he talks about what is the type of karma that you're doing right now. What is that type of action? In the Vasita Sutta, that is, it's all about that. It's not what you're born. One is not a Brahmin by birth. One is a Brahmin by action. By action, one is a Brahmin, the Buddha says over and over and over again. So that's the reflection in terms of karma and rebirth. What is really important, once again, is remembering that karma is something that we're doing. It's an action. So all we can do is, instead of speculating about the past, speculating about the future, speculating about the present, is actually focusing on what we're doing right now. And understanding that certain actions have certain consequences that lead us towards awakening, and certain other actions have other consequences that lead us towards suffering. Simple as that.
And another one of the questions that was sent in was, is there any way for me to verify the truth of this teaching? Yes. So karma, again, is the process of cause and effect through which our choices produce discernible consequences, discernible results. So yeah, this is definitely something that you can see happening in your daily life. From moment to moment, from day to day, from year to year, you can see how the choices you make produce corresponding results, corresponding effects. And you can also see that the ways that you develop and train your mind, the habitual activities of body, speech, and mind, create habits and tendencies of mind. How you can build up skills and you can also lose skills. You can build habits and you can also change habits. You can develop inclinations and tendencies and you can also lose inclinations and tendencies. And the other thing that we observe as we watch our experience is that our experience is one of an unbroken chain of moments of consciousness connected by cause and effect. And that extends back as far back as we can remember. And it's reasonable to therefore presume that it also extends into the future. So in terms of verifying rebirth, for example, well, you actually can verify it every day. So you wake up in the morning and you experience the consequences of whatever you did yesterday. And you have this memory of this person yesterday who did stuff. But is that exactly the same as the person you are today? Not really, not necessarily. You might have vague memories of what you did 10, 20 years ago, and you also experience the consequences. So, for example, I have a very faint scar just above my upper lip, and I actually remember exactly how it happened. It was almost 20 years ago now, but I remember exactly how the scar happened. So I still have the residual consequence of that decision. So in this way, you can start to see karma and rebirth operating within the bounds of what you can directly remember. And from that, you can extrapolate it operating in the areas that you don't remember as well. For example, I don't particularly remember very well much of my early childhood, but I'm pretty sure that cause and effect was still in operation during that time, relatively sure. So in the same way, I can't remember past lives, but I'm pretty sure that they were there. And I'm pretty sure that karma was functioning pretty much the same as it does in this life. Similarly, I'm pretty sure that there's future lives and that karma continues to function pretty much the same way as it does in this life. So these are ways that you can get deeper confidence in the teachings on karma and rebirth.
So I spoke about this a good amount before when I was talking about, observing it and seeing it in your own experience. And I do like to, every time I talk about this, I give one example from from my own life, from my career, I used to be Child Protective Services. So I worked with a lot of people who had a lot of different things going, mental health, drug use, all kinds of issues. And one of the things I remember this one experience so vividly. It's really, really hard. You can't really force or even get anybody to change. They have to be ready to change. Right. This is one thing that's important to understand. And this is even works. You can see this in yourself. But I remember this gentleman very vividly because he called me up. He says, man, he's like, I got a new job. I'm such and such week sober. I moved out of that area. I'm in a better area. I have a new apartment, all these kind of things. Right. And it's like, oh, that's very good. And I would, encourage him and help him do whatever I could to help him, because this is somebody who's actually trying to better his life and do better and do things. And then I remember getting a call, and this is something that's very common, right? A lot of the people who have lots of run-ins with the law, minor and major, end up having all kinds of little warrants, right? Maybe they decided not to go to court. Right? It could be something even minor. It's not even like they killed somebody. It could be something extremely minor. They didn't go to court. Well, there's a warrant out for their arrest because they didn't show up for court. And so what happened to this gentleman was he had some kind of car, he bought a new used car, and the used car said something with a light. So he got pulled over because of a light. Cop runs the license plate. Well, guess what? He has warrants. Guess what? He goes to jail, loses his job. Ends up having, after jail, he goes back out to the place where he was before, into his old habits, his old karma, his old haunt with his old friends. And he just falls right back into what happened. And you think, well, oh, that sounds so horrible. Well, I was a Buddhist when this happened. I had been practicing for some years by this point, and I realized, holy crap, like that's this guy's, everything that he did up to this point, like that warrant was like the past reaching in and saying, hello, remember? And all the good things that he did, right, were they weren't for a waste. And this is what I told him. I remember saying, I says, listen, we fall down. It's okay, man. Relapse is part of recovery. You know this. We're going to fall. You just got to get back up and keep going. But like that was such a vivid thing for me to see that. Right? This is somebody who's really like, everything is going so good and things are going good, but the past came back, right? Even this minor thing. And so you can see this in life. You don't necessarily, most people, don't have the powers and the abilities to be able to see their past lives. Right? That is something that you can develop, but most people don't. But you can see that your actions have consequences that are long, and even things that you think you might have gotten away with years and years and years ago can come right back. Right? And again, it's not like it's not a cosmic judge. Right? Look at Angulimala, right? The same kind of thing. He did all kinds of bad things, but also because of his past good deeds, he had the karma to be able to, to be able to meet the Buddha and to, change and to become awakened. Right? That's very powerful. Yeah. So I always like to tell that story because it's so impactful to me that I remember it still to this day, how we have to, watch out for our actions, because our actions will have consequences in the future, one way or the other.
Yeah. And it's also good to remember that if we've spent a lot of time cultivating wholesome states of mind, then that gives us a resilience when the consequences of our past bad choices do catch up with us. If we've been cultivating wholesome states of mind, then we can endure those consequences without being knocked off balance by them. We can take them in stride and see it as an opportunity to cultivate equanimity, and also a good reminder of the importance of continuing to make good choices and avoiding situations which are beyond our current strength of mind to endure.
Yeah.
And Henry asks, is good karma like the raft crossing the river, which has to be cast away once one is fully awakened? Well, the truth is that once you're fully awakened, then karma is no longer relevant to you. But up until then, it is. So just like the raft, you don't cast away the raft until you've made it to the far side of the river. If you cast away the raft and you're in the middle of the river, good luck. Because that's all you're going to have at that point is you're not going to have much to rely on. So yeah, good karma is like the raft, which you use to cross the river, which means you need to hold on to that raft until you're done crossing the river. Okay.
Thank you. And Sud asks, how does understanding of karma for a serious practitioner help with the development of metta? If you're wishing someone well, but then on the other hand, you also know it's basically a fact that they will experience the results of their actions, it seems contradictory to wish someone well while knowing they're subject to their own karmic results. Nothing one can do about it. I see that Bhante J has a lot of karma that he wants to make on this.
Well, this is something actually that I kind of wanted to bring up earlier, but I was waiting for the right time. So in terms of like the misconceptions, one of the things that, yes, you can read in like in the Majjhima Nikaya, you can read the Buddha says, it's because of such and such deed, you're born ugly or poor or this or that or that. And people say, oh, well, okay, well, this is why. And then, but there's other places where the Buddha says, when you see somebody who has a misfortune, you reflect, I too have had this misfortune in a past life. And when you see somebody who's doing good, right, you reflect, oh, I also was doing good in a past life. Right? The Buddha has given us all these reflections that counteract any negativity or misconceptions that would come with karma. All right. So when you reflect on, and then the other fact is that throughout our ungodly amounts of lives that we've had in samsara, we've been both Hitler and Mother Teresa, right? We've done the most worst, horrible things. I'm sure in one life I made Genghis Khan look like a Boy Scout, right? And I've, in another life, I was the most holy, wonderful person that did lots of good deeds, right? We all have such lots of good and bad past deeds done. And so when you actually reflect on that, metta naturally just comes like, oh man, geez, samsara sucks. Like, this is horrible. And so then you're just like, well, then you start to have compassion for yourself. And you have compassion for other people when you understand that, this is the nature of this horrible existence. So the Buddha picks up a little bit of dung in his finger and it says, I don't approve of even this much of samsara, because that's so horrible. And you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It's not an easy thing. So when you actually understand this, it's natural that metta and compassion arises, and it's natural that like a lot of the things that we've been talking about karma is related to judgment, right? And when you understand this, there's no judgment. It's like, oh, okay, it's not that you're condoning that somebody does something bad, but you just realize on a kind of grander scale that, this is the state that we're all in, right? And the Buddha wants us to reflect on these things. The same thing again. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who at one point wasn't your mother, your father, whatever, right? You see somebody suffering and he's like, stupid, their karma. No, he's like, oh, this person was my mother before, right? I know this person, right? And I remember that, right? All of us, if you've had some kind of suffering, some kind of loss, right? When you have the experience of seeing somebody else do it, that it's very easy to sympathize with that because you've experienced that. And so the Buddha actually wants us to reflect within that context of rebirth and karma that, yeah, we've done all that before too. We've experienced that before, right? And so why am I, judging? And so the Buddha says, don't pay attention to what others have done and not done. Pay attention to what you have done and not done. And you realize, like, oh, I've done that. Maybe even in this life, I've done that. I'm sure probably in a past life, I've done that. So when that kind of wisdom, when you really start to see that, that's where the Buddha's compassion comes from, because the Buddha's on the top of the mountain looking down and seeing all these stupid people who are doing all these bad. That's why when he became awakened, he's like, why would I teach the Dhamma? It would be really vexing. Nobody would get it, right? Because he sees all that. But it's like, out of compassion, he said, okay, some people will be able to get it, right? So having that kind of perspective and going with the teachings, the recommendations of the Buddha says to reflect on this, then it's very easy for metta and karuna and mudita to arise. Very easy for these things to arise, because it comes out of wisdom. You're not trying to force it. It comes out of understanding that, you're not that much different than anybody else you're going to meet. You're a being stuck in samsara.
Great. Lovely. And briefly, Vivian asks, isn't there individual karma and collective karma? No, there's only individual karma. I think we spoke about that in some detail earlier on. Calzer Friend says, to be clear, is birth as an untouchable a result of karma, or is it something else, like bad luck or a consequence of the society one is born in? Do you want to talk about this?
So, well, my understanding from the suttas is that, yes, our social class is the result of our karma, our past karma. But that is not just it, The thing is that being born in a particular class of society or in a particular form, etc., that's just one part of our whole markup. So we are all experiencing so many different results of past karma. So, like, for example, when you think about the untouchables, well, the untouchables are, when you think about Buddhism in India these days, well, it's 99.9% people who are in the Dalit class, who have access to the Dhamma. So if I wanted to be reborn, honestly, right now, if I were to be reborn in India right now, honestly, I would prefer to be reborn in the untouchable class, because I would have access to the Dhamma. That is an incredibly amazing, good karma. Do you see what I mean? So we get very fixated on this sort of like black and white way of seeing the world. So, social class is one type of thing. Dr. Ambedkar is an incredible man, one of the most popular, actually, men that of modern India, that has done so much good karma for so many different sentient beings, whether they were Dalit or not Dalit. He actually brought back Buddhism to India. So many people practice the Dhamma, convert to right view, So that's an incredible sentient being, for example. So actually, is that bad karma to be Dr. Ambedkar? I don't think so, So I feel like we should have a bit of a more wider perspective on human beings. As a woman, for example, being in Buddhism, there is a lot of discrimination on women. And lots of times I've been told, like, this kind of blank statement, oh, yeah, it's bad karma to be a woman. Like, you have to wait for next life, etc. I find it utterly absurd. At the very beginning, I was kind of listening to these voices, and then I was like, well, the bad karma that I have right now is actually that it's something that I'm doing. I'm listening to these pernicious voices, and then I'm acting in a way that is unskillful, in a way that it's not leading me towards a cessation of suffering. Good karma is actually understanding I can make wholesome actions that lead me towards the cessation of suffering. And so, yes, creating conditions for us to practice and for others to practice is incredible good karma. So once again, karma is a verb, really. It's something that we're doing right now. All of the rest is speculation. It's usually done by many delusional people, including ourselves. So when we start making these blank statements, then we get very, very confused. And I would say if, being born with a particular body, being born with in a particular society, etc., was just bad luck or just luck in general, well, we would be very much in trouble, because that means that everything is kind of random. And so then there is no point to Buddhist practice, because there is no way of actually kind of predicting, it's kind of like if whether or not I'm going to get a job is random, then I just don't apply for the job, I just hope that I'm going to have the good luck of like getting a sort of job offer tomorrow, or instead of paying the bills to get the light, I'm like, oh well, I'll just, maybe it's good luck if I have light or not. We don't act that way with everything else. So we shouldn't act that way when we're kind of understanding, when we're investigating these teachings of the Buddha. It's all cause and consequence. So you don't like the consequence, well then put some other causes.
I want to add to that. So there's a sutta, and it's one of my favorite suttas because it deals with karma, it deals with everything. So the sutta says, the Buddha says there's 4 kinds of persons, and there's lots of 4 kinds of persons. This is one of my favorite kinds of suttas, actually. But in this sutta, the 4 kinds of people are this. There's one born in darkness heading to dark, born in darkness heading to light, born in light heading to light, born in light heading to darkness. And so the Buddha describes born in dark is like you're born poor and ugly and your health is bad and all these kind of things. Born in light is you're born rich and healthy and all the good positive things. Right? So that's where you're starting out. Right? You're born in the dark, you're born in the light, one way or the other. Right? Now, the next section is, where are you heading? Are you heading to darkness or are you heading to light? Heading to light is doing good deeds, good sila, practicing the path, doing well, right? Good deeds, meditating, all that kind of stuff. That's heading to the light. Heading to the darkness is doing bad deeds, acting unskillfully. So no matter who you are, you're born rich, poor, beautiful, ugly, whatever, are you heading to the darkness or are you heading to light? That's like the point. That's the important thing. All right. And we see this as a society. We love like the people who were born like the complete underdogs, but yet they were able to make something of their life, right? They were able to, they were born really, really poor, but they, became, were good people and they built something, we like really like that. So like when I hear about the person born into darkness and really making the effort to, head towards the light, that's tough. Because, when you're born if you're born like rich and beautiful and good looking, it's not that it's like, well, why do I act good? Well, what's the point of this? If you're born poor and horrible, maybe like, well, it's easier just to sell drugs or do this or that, right? So it's actually harder, no matter which way you're born, to actually head towards the light. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that we want to head towards the light, right? No matter what our past, no matter who we were born, what we were born, whatever, we can always choose to head towards the light, even though it's going to be hard, even though there's unsurmountable odds sometimes. We want to, both practitioners, we want to head towards the light. That sutta is a very good message as to what's the point, like where we should focus on. Not where we were born, but where we're heading.
Okay. And Henry has a question. Is it fair to say that karma is stored in our memories, our ideas and beliefs and intentions, intention in our emotions and body? And follow up to the previous question, where is past life karma stored? So actually, as far as a location where karma is stored, I don't believe that's ever directly addressed anywhere in the suttas. In the later Mahayana tradition, they speak about the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which is basically like deep subconscious. So that's where they would say that past life karma is stored, and also present life karma for that matter. Again, there's actually no distinction. The Buddha never made any distinction between present life karma and past life karma. It's all just karma. That's it. So all of that would be stored in your deep subconscious, which is just a part of the mind. And the mind is not the body, though the mind does have a strong effect on the body. The mind is not the body. So karma is definitely not stored in your body. It's in the mind. Yep.
you, Bante. And Rahulawad says, can sometimes too much emphasis on intention of an action and too little on some clear harmful results can be a mistaken approach? Like, for example, hiking on grass and focusing on not intending to harm insects rather than choosing some path without grass and sensibility watching where one's feet land. Venerables?
Well, I do think that if you have two options which are otherwise equal, but one of them is easier to do wholesome choices, then yeah, as a general rule, it's probably a good idea to choose the path where it's easier to make wholesome choices. But wherever you are, so whether you're in a place where it's hard to make good choices or a place where it's easy to make good choices, the important thing is that you make a sincere, diligent, ongoing effort to always make wholesome choices. That's the important thing. So maybe at some point in the past, you chose to go somewhere where it's hard to make good choices. Well, now you're experiencing the consequences of that choice. And you might need to revisit that decision and maybe move somewhere else. Where it's easier to make good choices. So, for example, earlier Bante J gave the example of the recovering addict who chose to move away from their old friends. That's going somewhere where it's easier to make wholesome choices. But then later wound up going right back where his old bad friends were. And then it's easy to make bad choices again. So it's good to try to choose a path in life where it's easier to make wholesome choices. But wherever you are, just do your best to always make good choices, always make good karma.
And Kaiser Friend asks, I can see how actions have consequences in my life, but I can't see how actions in past lives led to things in my life today. Unlike the person yesterday, I don't have memories of past lives. How can we see the difference between past life karma and things just having been randomly determined at birth? Well, first of all, I would say, are you sure that you can see how actions have consequences in your life? I mean, psychology is pretty big in the West, and that's mostly what one does through a therapist. Dig really deeply in like what happened when we were children, like, you know, like, and younger and younger and younger and younger and younger, and still like you could spend your entire life actually thinking about this current life and trying to figure out what happened and still actually not really get all the ramifications. So first and foremost, I disagree with the fact that we remember everything. And actually, you know, it's very interesting because we usually go to the therapist because we have some kind of like distress, right? We hardly ever go like to the therapist, as Venerable Rubina Cortin invites us to reflect. We never go like, oh, hey, my life is going great. You know, I love my job. My relationship is wonderful. Let's talk about this, therapist, right? We're more like, oh, you know, there's like some kind of dukkha, right? Some kind of distress. And that's why we go to the therapist to kind of try to understand and figure out where that source is. And we usually think that, you know, we attribute it to our parents, our like growing up, like just different things that we commonly attribute to this life, right? But when, you know, little children are born, when we look at them, as soon as they come out of the womb, they all have a lot of greed, hatred, and delusion. And it manifests in different shapes and forms, right? So where is that coming from? So we can say like, you know, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm a little insecure because when I was like 4 years old, blah, 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 this happened and this other thing happened. And then my parents did this and this to me. And then my brother did this and that to me. And, and then my friends and then this and that, right? But what about then just when you're born? And why do siblings, for example, have, like myself and my brothers, entirely different people since the day we were born? And my nephews, since the day we were born, very different shapes, flavors of greed, hatred, and delusion. So when you say, how can we see the difference between past life karma and things just having been randomly determined at birth? Well, once again, you're making a statement there, randomly determined at birth. You think that it's randomly determined at birth, when everything else, your experience in this lifetime of what you can quote unquote see is all cause and consequence. So it's actually quite bizarre and illogical to think that some things are just totally random when you're born, and then just some other things are completely random after you're dead. Like there is no cause and consequence logic with birth and death, but everything else between birth and death is cause and consequence. I think that is illogical. Having this kind of like horizontal, you only live once. Well, YOLO actually is based on Abrahamic understanding of the world. So you only live once, and then you're reborn in either hell, heaven, and in Italy we also have purgatory. But you know, the secular is always based on the religious. So you only live once is basically an Abrahamic understanding of the world minus the afterworld, minus heaven and hell, etc. But a circular understanding of the world, I think it's actually a lot more logical. You know, once I kind of started questioning why I had the assumptions just like you did, and realized that other people from different cultures had radically different assumptions of the world, then I started questioning my assumptions and going like, where is this? Is a belief, you know, I think it's a secular or like, you know, just kind of neutral concept, but it's actually a belief. Where is that belief based? And then I realized I was a Christian essentially, even though I was defining myself as an agnostic, because YOLO is a Christian concept. That's where we're getting it from. There's nothing wrong in having that worldview, you know, it's just bits of you. But we should tell it like it is. It's a Christian worldview.
I just wanted to clarify something real quick in terms of not getting wrapped up in this mindset of like everything that happens. Oh, is this past karma? Was I born this way because of past karma? Honestly, I can tell you on an average day, I spend not even a minute contemplating my past karma. Like I was like, oh, is this past karma? Oh, did I miss breakfast this morning? Is that because of past karma? No. My focus is always on practicing and developing, you know, for the future. This is it. I've met many people who do get, you know, maybe they have, you know, different temperamental, psychological things that they would focus, you know, hyper focus on. Oh my God, karma, this and this and this and this. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the sutta where the Buddha says, you know, there's 4 things that if you were trying to contemplate, your head would explode. One of them is the full workings of karma. You have to get to a point where you just like let go, thinking that you need to, or you should, or you want to know all of the inner workings, right? That has to be unveiled. Like when the Buddha, right before the Buddha became awakened, then he had his 3 sights, right? All his past lives, how beings are born and die according to their karma, all these kind of things, right? That's, you know, when you get to that point, then you can understand more deeply, like these kind of very intricate, hard to see things. Up until that point, don't focus too much on karma and past karma. Focus on how that karma means action. Karma is what you're doing now, right? How you're choosing to live now, heading towards the light. That's the karma you want to focus on.
And Sumrate says, sometimes there are gray areas in man-made laws and it becomes difficult to choose which is the right course of action. How to decide in such situations what is wholesome and unwholesome? Well, first off, you can't rely upon man-made laws. Man-made laws are sometimes wholesome and sometimes unwholesome. So that's not what we use as the basis for decisions. But rather we evaluate our choices and ask ourselves, what is going to be beneficial to myself and others? And those are the choices we try to make. What's going to be harmful to myself and others? And those choices we try to avoid. Of course, whenever possible, it's usually wise to follow laws so that you don't get into trouble with the government. But that's a secondary consideration, which comes after making wholesome choices.
Thank you, Bante. And good to see you, Elaine. We chanted actually several days ago for your father. I forgot to reply just because we've been pretty busy at the monastery, but I wanted to let you know. Cause our friend says, it is my understanding that in the Dalit Buddhist movement, the idea of past life karma is generally rejected, though. Some people do, some people don't. But, it's also understandable that a group of people that has suffered so much in that context has had certain, different evolutions.
Okay. And Janaki says, aren't good deeds born of good thoughts from purified minds? After all, Buddhism is all about how to cultivate and develop the mind to the highest possible level. Yes. So you make the choice to purify your mind and cultivate good thoughts, and then that makes it easier for you to perform good deeds. And yeah, this is what Buddhism is all about. Yeah.
And Scott, yes, asks, how best to prepare when bad karma arises? Jane?
Oh, when bad things happen to you in life,
yes,
you learn from them, right? You try to be as mindful as possible, to act in the most skillful way possible. Then you grow and you learn from them. That's what you do. That's, if you are wanting to head towards the light, then you want to try to develop your mindfulness, always practicing satipatthana, always practicing mindfulness. And then when bad things happen, you can be with it. You can observe it. You can have an upper hand in knowing what to do in that situation. That's skillful. And that's how, because as long as even after you're awakened, right? Angulimala still had to have rocks thrown at him. Buddha still had the bad back. Like, even after you're awakened, an awakened being still has to, while they're still in that last body, the karma is still, of that body is still there. The awakened beings are not bothered by it, right? Because they're beyond it. But, this is something that is always going to be a part of life, right? So it's a matter of how do you practice in such a way so that when, things that we identify as bad or unwanted arise, we actually rise to the occasion. We actually skillfully use them for our growth and our development, as opposed to, creating more harm and more, negative actions and negative mindsets.
And Robert says, I've only read bits and pieces of the suttas. Keep reading. They're great. But doesn't the Buddha say that not absolutely everything is caused by karma, i.e. that sometimes stuff happens, so to speak? No, the Buddha never says that, ever, at all, anywhere. There's one particular sutta which is often taken out of context and held up as a place where the Buddha supposedly says this. But that particular sutta is one where somebody asks if pain is always the direct effect of past karma. And the Buddha gives many different reasons why so physical afflictions can happen, including choosing the wrong foods to eat, choosing not to take good care of your body, choosing to do unhealthy things. And he also mentions the effects of sickness. He also mentions past karma as also being a possible direct cause. And you look more closely at this list and you're like, eating the wrong food. Well, that means you chose to eat the wrong food. That means it's karma. Bad health from insufficient exercise. Well, that means you chose to not exercise sufficiently. Getting sick. Well, what is sickness? Well, elsewhere in the Chulakama Vibhanga Sutta, for example, the Buddha says that sickness is the result of cruelty in past lives, being cruel to other living beings. Then you have a lot of sicknesses and health problems in this life. So you start tracking it all down and putting it in the context of the suttas, and you're like, oh, actually every single item on that list is karma. So that sutta, it's commonly used to try to justify the view that stuff happens and not everything is karma, but actually that's not what the Buddha is saying at all. Only if you take the sutta out of context can you come to that conclusion.
Thank you, Bhante. And I would also like to say that I take that sutta also as a skillful means for the Buddha basically to tell us, to invite us not to obsess about everything being karma. Essentially what Bhante J was saying, he's not like waking up in the morning going like, oh my God, everything is the result of my past karma. Like, oh, I burped. Past karma. Must have like tortured like birds or something. Or like, oh, I don't know, I'm sweating. Must be past karma. I must have like, done this and that. Because then actually our head is going to explode. And it also is nonsensical. Essentially, having a body, a human body, is the product of past karma. And of course, a body comes with, being prone to old age, sickness, and death. That's just how things are. Now, of course, there are some, excessive sort of states of sickness and excessive states of aging, etc., that can be attributed to like a heavier karma from past life that is on top of the karma of just leading to a human rebirth, which, by the way, is a really good karma because it allows us to practice the Dhamma in the most perfect sort of situation possible. But, then when it just comes to having a human body, then obviously that just comes with everything else, like burping, like having digestive sort of normal digestive issues, discomfort, etc., just comes with having a body, essentially.
And Vero says, in the Talaputta Sutta, the Buddha says that being a dancer will accumulate unwholesome karma that will lead to hell realms. Actually, no, that's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha said that if one is performing a dance performance with the intention of deliberately increasing greed, hatred, and delusion in one's audience, then that can lead to rebirth in a lower realm. Not absolutely, definitely will, but it can. So the point here is it's not dancing that leads to rebirth in hell realms, but it's doing an action with the intention to make other people's minds more defiled and deluded. That's what leads to rebirth in a lower realm. Very important distinction there.
And Samrit asks, is creating causes and conditions to improve our current situation by performing wholesome deeds considered selfish? Okay, Bhante J replied.
No, this is what you should be doing, right? To improve your current situation. And, if you have a family, that also improves your family situation. And that can also improve the people around you, your neighbors and things like that, right? That's a good thing. You have to be able to, do good things to improve your own situation. Then that actually puts you in a better situation to even help others, right? So no, that's not selfish. Right, the Buddha says in the simile of the acrobat, right? When taking care of oneself, one takes care of others. When taking care of others, one takes care of oneself. So take care of yourself. That's important. The Buddha never says that you should sacrifice. Actually, he says the opposite. He says in the Dhammapada, you should not sacrifice yourself for others. Mm-hmm. Right? He's always talking about you have to look for what's good for yourself and others. Both is important.
Thank you. And Kelvin says, there's a popular belief that when we transfer merits, those who do not believe in the Buddha Sasana will not be able to receive it. What's your take on it?
Where do people come up with these ideas? Yeah, no, the Buddha never said anything like that. No.
Okay, great. And Kaiser Friend says, if it's possible to do skillful things, head to the light without dwelling on past life karma, can we do so without holding that view in the first place? I would say sure, yes. I mean, do whatever works. If you're actually doing good deeds, you're going to get the result. If I actually do all the actions in order to, if like I prepared the soil, I plant the seed, I water the seed, I make sure that there's sunlight to the seed, etc., and I've planted a tomato seed in the perfect conditions, then I will get the tomato plant. even if I don't believe that the tomato plant exists. So yes, do whatever works.
Okay. And Kristen said, I thought there was a sutta that mentioned bad weather as outside of karma. As far as I know, that's in the Abhidhamma or the commentaries, but I don't think that's anywhere in the suttas. So to be born in a place with bad weather conditions actually would be the result of past life karma. Some people are born in places where the weather is always beautiful and nice and pleasant. That's the result of good karma. Other people are born in places where the weather's really bad. That's the result of bad karma.
But the people are really rough, like
That
Suna
too.
Paranta.
Yeah, that too. And Anonymous says, if a plane goes down and everybody dies, all people on board had bad karma or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Why is it considered bad karma to die in a plane crash? And millions of people die in a car crash every day. Like, is that? There's just lots of ways you can die. It's just, like I remember seeing a story about this woman. She didn't die, but she's in her bed going for sleep, and a meteorite comes from the sky, busts through her house, and goes right through the pillow next to her. I was like, well, geez, I never thought I could die from a meteorite, but there's just lots of ways you can die, and it's death is death. I mean, no, I don't see anything, bad from dying from a plane crash as opposed to a car crash, as opposed to a lot of other ways you can die.
Great, thank you. Izira asks, since attaining jhana is a garuka karma, if someone attains one, will he or she definitely be born in a Brahma realm?
Not necessarily. So again, it's not always easy to track the exact results of each specific karma. And again, the Buddha says not to speculate on these things. So it is true that practicing jhana is very strong, good karma, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're definitely going to be born in a Brahma realm in your next life. Not necessarily, because there's so many other factors that can affect what karma dominates in one's next life. So yeah, it's important not to be too simplistic about these things.
Is that Garu? I've never seen that word before. Is that related to like Garudama, like heavy? Like
yeah,
great,
Garu
like
means serious.
Serious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Garuka karma, it's probably a commentarial term.
Okay.
And this back to Bante J. What if one of those plane crash victims is a non-returner?
Then they don't have to worry about being in a plane crash ever again.
I knew we would have had a great answer.
Their human life is done. They don't have to be humans again.
Sadhu.
I have to say, the Sangha panels are great.
Yes. And Robert asks, if the intention to defile is what causes rebirth in hell realms, then it's possible to be an actor and not be reborn in hell? I was under the impression that the Buddha said this pretty explicitly.
Again, it's the intention to increase defilement and delusion in one's audience. That's what leads to rebirth in a hell realm. So, for example, let's say that you're an actor in a performance of the Buddha's life, for example. Does that mean you're going to hell? No, in fact, you might actually be helping the people in the audience get a better understanding of the Dhamma. That's actually sounds like a good thing to me. So no, being an actor doesn't mean you're automatically destined to a hell rebirth. It all depends upon what you're doing with that job and why you're in that job in the first place.
Okay. And Jojo,
off topic.
Okay, you can ask that tomorrow for a mock chat. And Harry says, isn't the Buddha's bad back an example of karma being stored in the body? Actually, I understand it's not the karma being stored in the body, it's the karma causing body afflictions.
Correct. Yeah.
And Samrit says, sometimes when bad things happen in succession, mind feels traumatized and it becomes immobilized to distinguish between different choices and which choice would be beneficial. How to decide then?
You can only do the best you can do. Yeah, it's you fall back on the teachings, you fall back on what you know to be good, to be skillful, and you go forward. Nobody knows how to do things like, when somebody close to them dies. Unless you had that experience before, you don't know how to handle it. You don't know what to do. You can learn, from a religion or from what other people might give you advice or whatever. But you just try to do your best. You try to, be there to investigate, to understand, and to not try to push away the experience, not try to avoid the experience, and to repress it, but to understand it and to learn from it, right? So you're not going to be perfect at it. It's okay. Just learn what you can. Do the best that you can. Nobody gets out of this life clean. Nobody gets out of this life clean. I've done things, and I know people who've done bad, worse things maybe, but I've still done things. I'm not, unless I become awakened. That's the only time I'm going to get out of this life clean. But anybody else, if you're not awakened, you reach the end of your life. It's just samsara. It's the way it is.
Thank you. And Isira says, is being a singer of secular music also add a bad karma because some music won't generate lust, but it will probably generate the desire in audience to listen to more of the singer? Kamachanda. So let's remember that karma is an intentional action. So essentially, what are we trying to do whenever we are doing that action? So there's different ways, for example, of playing music or being a singer, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that, well, I don't want to speak for Bhante what he was saying earlier, but my interpretation of that sutta, what the Buddha is suggesting, is essentially to basically do the opposite of what the advertising industry does in the United States. Essentially, don't try to instigate greed, hatred, and delusion in people with the understanding that then they will spend more and they will follow you more. But rather do something, if you just do music just for the sake of trying to communicate and express through creativity a message, that's whatever. It's just the karma of making music. You will be reborn a very talented musician later on. But instead, if you're like, oh, I want to, be the new Lady Gaga, so how much can I make this music to be pop and kind of get people to spend so much on this thing, which is a copy of that kind of music, etc. And maybe actually I'm going to put these lyrics that are going to be very hateful towards that group of people, because I know that then I'm going to get something out of that. And then those people will be such idiots after listening to this music. So then they will purchase more music, etc. All of those are harmful, negative intentions, essentially. And that leads to a negative consequence.
And that's the last of the questions?
Actually not. We have the last, Bhante, sorry. Oops. Which is...
Okay, so this is the last of the questions from the email. It says, without the doctrine of past life, karma, and rebirth, can there still be Buddhism? Well, if by Buddhism you mean the path to complete awakening, then the answer is no. No. Buddhism contains karma and rebirth as essential core principles. But if by Buddhism you mean, can somebody begin to practice some elements of Buddhism without believing in past life, karma, and rebirth, then the answer is yes. Yes, you can practice actually many elements of Buddhism without the concepts of karma and rebirth. But eventually, at some point, you will come face to face with these concepts and you'll need to evaluate them. But you can start practicing without having deep faith in these things. You don't need to start off with deep faith in these ideas. You can practice much of the path without facing these concepts just yet.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much, friends, for joining us this evening for this Sangha panel. We will be meeting again tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with a mystery monk who will be sharing some probably sutta study, words of Dhamma. And then tomorrow evening again with monk chat. So at 7:30 p.m. New York City time, you can tune in and ask any Dhamma question that you have. And if you're around this weekend in the New Jersey, New York City area, you're welcome to come to Empty Cloud Monastery during our, excuse me, our hours that are 6 p.m. on Saturday. We have evening meditation here outdoors, and then on Sunday it's a full day, basically from 8 a.m. you can come and volunteer all the way to 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon.
Great. So we'll see you all next time, and we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.